The Galactic Academy's Xenobiology department was renowned throughout the cosmos. Students from dozens of species, representing countless planets and star systems, had gathered to study the intricacies of life forms across the galaxy. They were used to diversity, winged beings from light-gravity worlds, oceanic species who glided across artificial water platforms, crystalline entities who communicated through vibrations. Each species brought unique perspectives and experiences, forming a microcosm of the galaxy itself. Yet today, an unprecedented guest was about to join them, and the atmosphere in the Academy halls was electric with anticipation and trepidation. Whispers echoed through the corridors as students prepared for the arrival of a Deathworlder. That term alone filled them with equal parts fear and fascination. Deathworld designated planets that posed extreme survival challenges, environments riddled with harsh climates, toxic flora, aggressive predators, and relentless natural disasters. Deathworlds were the polar opposites of the carefully regulated home planets many of these students hailed from. To them, a Deathworlder was nearly mythical, a creature shaped by an ecosystem so unforgiving that the idea of it was nearly incomprehensible. How could any intelligent being survive in such a place, let alone thrive? As Professor Thryak, a respected Galithian elder, shuffled into the room, the students fell silent. Thryak was known for his calm demeanor and wisdom, and his presence today hinted at the gravity of the lesson to come. Thryak cleared his throat, the soft fur around his throat rippling slightly as he addressed the class. Today, we have an extraordinary opportunity. He began in a voice as soft as distant thunder. We will host a representative from Earth, a world classified as a type for Deathworld. I trust that you have prepared yourselves adequately for this experience. Please remember to observe with an open mind. Deathworlders are unique in many ways, and we have much to learn from them. The students sat at attention, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and anxiety. They had all heard of Earth, the planet known for its gravity stronger than that of most habitable worlds, for its intense weather patterns, and for its inhabitants, the humans. Stories about humans circulated among the Academy, and many of them seemed too strange to be true. Had they really developed entire strategies to live alongside their predators? Was it true that they traveled through their harsh environments willingly, by foot, and without the assistance of machinery? Rumors painted them as fearsome creatures, but today, they would finally meet one. The doors at the back of the classroom slid open, and in stepped a human, a Deathworlder in the flesh. The entire room fell silent, and even Thryak paused, momentarily captivated by the presence of this unusual being. The human was tall, their body dense and solid, clearly built for resilience. Their eyes, sharp and alert, surveyed the room with a mixture of curiosity and caution, an instinct perhaps ingrained by years of survival on a perilous planet. The human's hair was tied back, exposing their face, an odd arrangement of softness and strength, a balance that was as alien as it was intriguing to V. The human moved forward, each step calculated, as if sensing the quiet apprehension radiating from the room. The students observed her with fascination, taking in every detail. Her skin, they noted, was firm and exposed, only covered by clothing in certain areas. They noted with some surprise that her skin displayed slight discolorations and small scars, signs of past injuries. To them, this was both terrifying and incredible. Many of the species present had soft, flexible exoskeletons or scales that shielded them from harm, or they healed without any visible scarring. The human, however, wore these marks as if they were part of her identity, badges of survival etched into her very skin. After reaching the front of the room, the human nodded respectfully to Professor Thryak, who acknowledged her with a slight bow. "Class, I would like you to welcome Elena," he said with a hint of reverence. "She is here to share with us her experiences as a Deathworlder, a survivor from a planet that demands constant resilience." The class erupted into a mix of subdued whispers and wide-eyed stares. Elena offered a small smile, though it looked wary, as if she sensed the intensity of their gazes. She seemed unfazed, however, a trait that only added to her mystique. Thryak gestured for her to speak, and after a brief pause, she began. "My planet is challenging," she said, choosing her words carefully. "We face dangers that are sometimes as small as a speck of dust and as large as towering predators. Earth is a world that doesn't give anything for free, and we learn from a young age that survival requires adaptability and courage." Her voice was steady, almost serene, as she described a life that would have driven many of these students into hiding. The class sat in stunned silence, processing her words. To them, danger was something to avoid, not something to confront. For many, their home planets had low levels of natural threat. If their environments turned hostile, they had mechanisms in place to avoid it: camouflage, sensory evasion, and even biological abilities to go dormant until the threat had passed. But here was a creature who lived in a state of constant readiness, who saw danger as a normal aspect of existence. One student, whose species possessed delicate wings and moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity, raised a hesitant limb. "But how do you live with such threats around you? Surely, if the dangers are as constant as you say, wouldn't you be in a perpetual state of fear?" Elena smiled, and the warmth of it struck the class as oddly comforting, given her words. "Fear, yes, it's there, but we learn to live alongside it. You see, fear teaches us. It sharpens our senses, makes us alert, and forces us to adapt. It's a reminder of what's at stake. But instead of letting it paralyze us, we use it as a tool. It's what keeps us alive." The students exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of using fear as a tool was alien to them. To most of them, fear was a signal to flee, to preserve oneself by hiding or retreating. They realized that humans faced their fears directly, a terrifying and exhilarating thought that marked a drastic difference between them and the Deathworlders. Professor Thryak nodded approvingly, his admiration evident. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Elena, could you perhaps share a specific instance of survival on Earth, one that might illustrate how you respond to danger?" Elena's expression turned thoughtful. She paused, as if considering her words, before launching into a story about her encounter with a wild bear on a camping trip. She described the tension as she noticed the massive predator watching her from a distance, its dark eyes fixed on her as if weighing whether she was prey or threat. Her descriptions brought the scene vividly to life, and her audience was captivated, caught between horror and awe as she recounted her decision to stand her ground, to make herself appear large and intimidating despite her own fear. "And it worked," she finished, her voice steady. "The bear eventually lost interest and lumbered away. We have to face these threats directly. Running would have only signaled weakness, and on Earth, predators don't let weakness go unchallenged." The class sat in silence, barely breathing. To most of them, confronting a predator was unimaginable. But here was a Deathworlder, a being who not only encountered such creatures but faced them, stared them down, and lived to tell the tale. They were beginning to realize just how vastly different her life, and the lives of all Deathworlders, must be. As Elena's story settled into their minds, the classroom took on a new atmosphere. The students' initial fear had not disappeared, but it was now mixed with something else: an unexpected respect, an appreciation for the resilience of these beings from Earth. And as they watched Elena, they couldn't help but feel they were peering into the soul of a species unlike any they had ever known. In the quiet that followed, they sensed, perhaps for the first time, the true strength of a Deathworlder, a strength that went beyond physical power, rooted instead in a spirit that had been tempered by countless confrontations with danger. They realized they were witnessing a living testament to resilience, a creature who had not only survived a death world but had thrived within it. The following day, the atmosphere in the classroom was electric with anticipation. Yesterday's encounter had left an indelible impression on the students, and many had spent the night pondering the idea of humans, these Deathworlders, as beings who coexisted with, rather than avoided, danger. Today, the class gathered with even more curiosity and a dash of caution, unsure what new revelations awaited them. Professor Thryak stood calmly at the front, his wise eyes observing the class with a sense of mild amusement. Elena, their human guest, entered with her familiar steady gait, her presence once again drawing the class's complete attention. She seemed entirely at ease, as though the looks of shock and disbelief from the previous day were nothing unusual for her. Professor Thryak began, addressing the class. Today, Elena has graciously offered to continue her insights into life on Earth by discussing some of the more unique challenges she faces as a Deathworlder, he said with a nod toward her. Elena, the class is very eager to learn about your survival instincts and how they have helped you in times of, shall we say, imminent danger. Elena smiled, her expression warm but tinged with a hint of humor. All right, she began, I think I'll start by telling you about something that may seem strange to you. Our interactions with fire. At the mention of fire, a low ripple of alarm passed through the students. For many of them, fire was something to be feared and avoided at all costs. It was a force of nature that could consume, destroy, and even alter landscapes beyond recognition. Yet here was Elena, casually talking about it, as if it were part of everyday life. A student with glittering, translucent wings raised a hand, its delicate fingers trembling slightly. Excuse me, the student asked, her voice almost a whisper. Did you say fire? Elena nodded, as if this reaction was expected. Yes, fire. It's actually a very important part of our lives on Earth. We use it to cook food, to stay warm, and even to shape and refine materials. In fact, humans discovered how to use fire thousands of years ago, and it's played a huge role in our development as a species. The class was stunned, their alien minds struggling to grasp this concept. To them, fire was akin to a natural disaster, something unpredictable and deadly, a phenomenon to flee from. But here was a Deathworlder speaking about it as if it were a tool, a common, controlled part of her existence. The students exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and fascination. Elena continued, sensing the tension in the room, but pressing on with her story. I'll never forget the time I had a close encounter with fire. One that really tested my survival instincts, she said, her tone shifting as she prepared to tell a tale that clearly held weight. I was in my early 20s, and I had joined a group of friends for a camping trip in the mountains. We were surrounded by forest, tall pine trees, and a peaceful river flowing nearby. But one evening, while we were cooking around the campfire, something unexpected happened. The mention of a campfire, used casually and without fear, was enough to make several students shiver. Elena seemed to notice and gave them a reassuring smile before continuing. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and we caught a scent of smoke in the air, smoke that wasn't from our fire. We looked up and saw, in the distance, thick columns of smoke rising into the sky. A wildfire had started, likely sparked by a dry thunderstorm. The fire spread quickly, and before we knew it, we could see the glow of flames on the horizon. A gasp rippled through the room. For many students, the concept of a wildfire was beyond terrifying. It was something that could devastate entire regions. To imagine being in the middle of one was utterly unthinkable. Elena paused, allowing them to absorb the gravity of her words before she continued. In that moment, every instinct told us to run. But we knew we had to think quickly. Running blindly could have trapped us in the flames. Instead, we took stock of our surroundings. I remembered that fire follows the wind and spreads faster uphill, so we made our way down toward the river, which would be the safest place. I helped my friends keep calm, reassuring them that we'd be okay if we stayed focused. The class was silent, hanging on her every word. They couldn't imagine keeping calm in such a situation, much less thinking logically about escape routes. For most of them, even small threats were cause for flight. Yet here was Elena describing how she had stayed composed in the face of an inferno, her survival instincts kicking in as she guided her friends to safety. One student, a tall, slender creature with scales that shimmered like mother of pearl, raised a hand, visibly shaken. But weren't you afraid? Didn't your body resist? I mean, fire. Elena nodded. Oh, absolutely. I was terrified. My heart was pounding, and everything in me wanted to panic. But we humans have learned to use our fear, to let it guide us without letting it control us. I've trained myself to stay level-headed, to trust that if I stay calm, I can think clearly, even in the most dangerous situations. Another student, a creature with delicate, translucent antennae that vibrated with every movement, spoke up, her voice full of disbelief. On our planet, anything similar would mean certain death. Our people would go underground, hide, avoid the flames. But you faced it? Elena smiled again, a flicker of pride in her eyes. Yes, we faced it. It's not easy, of course, but humans have learned that sometimes we have to confront the danger head-on to survive. Running might not always be an option. On Earth, we've developed strategies over generations to manage fear and make survival a skill, a practiced instinct. The students were silent, absorbing her words. In their own worlds, survival was often a passive act, a means of avoiding predators, of hiding from storms, of blending into their environments. They could not comprehend willingly moving toward danger or even confronting it as humans did. To them, the idea was nearly alien. Professor Thryak stepped forward, his voice gentle but filled with respect. Elena, you have given us much to ponder. Could you tell us, what is it within you, within your species, that allows you to confront such dangers without succumbing to fear? Elena looked thoughtful, as if reflecting on something deeper within herself. I think it's because humans have faced challenges since the dawn of our existence. We've lived in forests, deserts, mountains, and oceans, surrounded by predators and natural forces that we could not control. Over time, we've learned to adapt, to face fear, and even to embrace it as part of our lives. We know that we cannot survive without risk, so we've learned to treat fear as a guide rather than an enemy. The classroom was silent, a sense of awe washing over the students as they tried to process her words. For most of them, the idea of embracing fear seemed incomprehensible. Yet here was a Deathworlder who had turned fear into a tool. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that survival for humans was more than instinct. It was an art, an attitude, a learned resilience born from millennia of adaptation. In the stillness of the room, the students realized they were glimpsing a depth of character and strength they had never encountered before. Elena was no longer merely a creature from a death world. She was a living embodiment of survival itself, a testament to the power of will and resilience. Her stories had revealed something far beyond their initial expectations, an understanding of survival that went beyond instinct, rooted in bravery, discipline, and the relentless determination to persevere. For the alien students, it was a revelation. They could see that the humans, Deathworlders though they were, held a strength that was not brutal or wild, but purposeful and tempered. And as they listened, a newfound respect grew within them. A respect not just for Elena, but for the entire species who had learned to tame the fire of fear and thrive in the face of the galaxy's most unforgiving challenges. On the third day, the classroom was filled with a tense kind of excitement as the students anticipated what new revelations their Deathworlder guest would share. Already, Elena's previous accounts of Earth's dangers and human adaptability had stirred profound reactions among the alien students. Today, Professor Thryak hinted, Elena would delve into one of humanity's oldest and most perilous traditions, fire. But today's lesson wouldn't just be about fire as a tool. It would reveal how humans embrace the flames as part of their survival ethos in even the most terrifying circumstances. Elena took her usual place at the front, her stance calm and focused, her eyes meeting the students with a warmth they had come to associate with her. Yet, behind that warmth, there was something else, a flicker of gravity, perhaps even reverence, as she prepared to discuss this primal force. Professor Thryak motioned for silence, and the class fell into a stillness of anticipation. Today, Elena began, I'm going to tell you about a concept that is both a tool and a trial for us humans. Fire. I know that to many of you, fire is something best avoided, and for good reason. It can be devastating. On Earth, we experience fire in many forms, from volcanic eruptions to wildfires that sweep across forests with terrifying speed. But fire is also something we've learned to wield. It's part of who we are as a species. She paused, watching as her words sank in, as the students exchanged glances of both curiosity and fear. But fire on Earth is not always a tool, she continued. It can also become a trial, one that tests our instincts, our bravery, and our survival skills. I experienced one of these trials myself during a wildfire outbreak several years ago. Her tone shifted, and the class fell completely silent, sensing the weight of the story she was about to tell. Elena began by describing how she and a group of friends had ventured into the mountains for a hiking trip. The region was known for its dense forests, winding rivers, and occasional wildfires. The students were already tense, imagining a world where the very air could suddenly turn hostile with smoke and flames. Elena explained that while humans were aware of the dangers, they were drawn to the mountains by a sense of challenge, adventure, and a connection with nature. A concept that was foreign to many of her listeners. She described the camp they had set up beside a river, their tents nestled among towering pine trees that swayed gently in the evening breeze. It was a scene of peace and beauty, one that the students could almost picture in their minds. But as Elena continued, the calmness of her story began to shift. She recounted the unsettling scent of smoke that had drifted toward them on the breeze. The first warning, a faint smell in the air, had been so subtle that they hadn't immediately reacted. But soon, they noticed thickening clouds of smoke in the distance, a reminder that they were in wildfire territory. The class watched her, their expressions tense with anticipation. When we realized a fire was spreading in our direction, our instincts kicked in, Elena explained. We knew we couldn't afford to panic. Fire is fast, and if you lose your composure, you lose precious time. I gathered my friends, and together we assessed our surroundings. We knew we had to move downhill toward the river, where the fire would be least likely to follow. We also knew that fires spread faster uphill, driven by the heat and the wind. The students exchanged glances, marveling at her calm in such a dire situation. For many of them, facing a force as unpredictable as fire was unimaginable. To confront it with composure and strategy rather than pure fear seemed, to them, the hallmark of a Deathworlder. One student, a thin, scaled being with luminescent eyes, raised a hand, voice trembling with awe and apprehension. But didn't the fear paralyze you? My species would have gone underground or waited in a safe shelter until it passed. How could you stand there and assess the danger? Elena nodded. Oh, there was fear, absolutely. My heart was racing, my instincts were shouting at me to run. But one of the things we learn on Earth, especially as Deathworlders, is that fear is information. It's our body's way of preparing us for action. But instead of letting it control us, we learn to control it, to channel it. I knew that running blindly could trap us. So we used the fear as motivation to act quickly and intelligently. The class sat in silence, processing this idea, fear as information. To most of them, fear was a command, an uncontested directive to avoid danger. But to these humans, fear was just another tool, something to be harnessed and used, rather than obeyed. It was both terrifying and inspiring. Elena continued, describing how she had led her friends downhill, each step measured, each breath steady, as the fire grew nearer. She spoke of the growing heat, the thickening smoke that clouded their vision and filled their lungs. And through it all, she kept calm, her mind focused on the goal of reaching the river. The students were riveted, trying to imagine what it would be like to move through a world choked with smoke, surrounded by a force that could engulf them at any moment. But it was the next part of her story that shook them the most. She described how, upon reaching the river, they found a small hollow beneath a cluster of rocks and waited, knowing that the riverbed would act as a natural firebreak. They had huddled there for hours, listening to the roar of the flames as they approached, the sound as loud as a thunderstorm. The air had become so hot that they had to cover their mouths with wet cloths, each breath a conscious effort to stay calm and endure. One student with a soft, jelly-like exterior and a faint bioluminescent glow whispered, "That sound, the roar, it must have been terrifying. How did you not despair?" Elena paused, her face thoughtful. There were moments when despair tried to creep in. The fire was so close, the air was so hot, and it seemed like the world around us was ending. But in those moments, I focused on each breath, each second that passed, knowing that if we could endure, the fire would pass us by. It's something we humans do, a sort of endurance mindset. Even when the world seems to be against us, we focus on the next step, the next breath, holding on to the knowledge that if we just keep going, we'll make it through. The students sat in silent awe, absorbing this new aspect of humanity. The resilience, the calm in the face of such raw power, the ability to endure in a situation that would drive most beings to panic. It was almost unfathomable. They realized that these Deathworlders weren't just strong or fearless. They possessed a kind of strength that came from facing terror directly, from refusing to yield to forces beyond their control. Professor Thryak stepped forward, his voice filled with a new respect. Elena, what you have described is beyond remarkable. For many of us, fire is a symbol of destruction, a force to be feared and avoided at all costs. Yet you humans have not only mastered it as a tool, but have also learned to survive within its grasp. You possess a fortitude that is frankly awe-inspiring. Elena smiled, humbled by the professor's words. Thank you, Professor. Fire is a double-edged sword for us, but it's part of our lives. We respect it and we know it can be dangerous, but we also know it can help us grow, survive, and even thrive. I think, in a way, it's a metaphor for our existence on Earth. We live alongside danger, and instead of fearing it, we learn from it. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the students like a blanket. They realized that humans didn't just survive by avoiding threats. They thrived by understanding and adapting to them, by facing dangers head-on with a resilience that was deeply ingrained in their very being. As Elena finished, the class broke into quiet murmurs. Their previous fear transformed into a profound admiration. The fire trial, they realized, was not just a survival story. It was a testament to human spirit, a window into the resilience and adaptability that made humans true Deathworlders. For these alien students, fire would never be the same. It was no longer simply a source of destruction, but also a symbol of strength, of learning, and of survival in the most challenging of circumstances. And as they looked at Elena, they understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A Deathworlder who had not only endured the fire, but emerged from it stronger, carrying with her a legacy of survival that few others in the galaxy could match. This expanded chapter delves deeply into the emotional tension and philosophical impact of Elena's story on the alien students, highlighting the resilience, adaptability, and profound strength that define humanity's relationship with fire and survival. The fourth day's lesson carried a weight even greater than the previous ones, as Professor Thryak had warned the students of the intensity of today's discussion. They would be learning about the warrior instinct within humanity, a survival trait that went beyond physical strength and even beyond the resilience they had discussed in relation to fire and other elements. Today, they would confront the complex and, to many of them, disturbing concept of humanity's history with war. The students took their places quietly, their usual energy dampened by the prospect of hearing about humanity's combative nature. Many of them had grown up in cultures where aggression was rare or even unheard of. Their species had evolved to prioritize community, peace, and careful evasion of danger. Yet here was a Deathworlder, one who had not only survived natural threats but also, it seemed, learned to face and master conflict between their own kind. As Elena stepped to the front of the class, her face held a somber expression, sensing the students' apprehension. She paused, gathering her thoughts before addressing the room. Today, I'm going to speak about something that may be difficult to understand, she began. It's a part of human history that we're not always proud of, but it's also a defining aspect of who we are. I'm talking about conflict, about the drive to protect ourselves, and sometimes even to wage war. Her words sent a ripple of tension through the room, and several students shifted uncomfortably. War, as they understood it, was a concept of near-mythical proportions. For many, the idea of fighting among one's own kind was as foreign as the concept of willingly walking into a wildfire. The very idea felt almost grotesque to them. Professor Thryak nodded, his eyes thoughtful, before gesturing for her to continue. Please, Elena, explain to us this warrior instinct. Elena took a steadying breath, then began. Humans, like many species, evolved to protect ourselves, our families, and our communities. And on Earth, that meant developing the ability to fight when necessary. But we took it further. We evolved a complex social structure around the idea of defense and sometimes offense. This instinct to protect ourselves has driven us to create organized strategies, develop weapons, and even train individuals specifically to be warriors. The students listened, rapt and slightly horrified, as Elena continued. She spoke of humanity's long history of combat, of the battles that had shaped nations and cultures, of wars that had spanned continents and lasted generations. She described the structured ranks, the training, the tactics, and the sheer mental resilience required to confront enemies, often at great personal risk. The class sat in silent awe, struggling to reconcile this image with the kind, thoughtful person standing before them. One student, a slender, avian-like being with iridescent feathers that shimmered as he spoke, raised a tentative hand. But don't you fear each other? To know that others of your kind might turn on you, isn't that disturbing? Elena gave a rueful smile, understanding the sentiment. It can be, but it's complicated. Most of the time, we don't think about it that way. On Earth, trust and loyalty to one's group, family, or nation are just as strong as any instinct for self-preservation. We fight to protect, not out of a need to destroy. And in recent history, we've begun to work even harder to prevent wars. Our societies now recognize the value of cooperation, but that warrior instinct is still a part of us. The students were visibly perplexed, trying to fathom the paradox of a species that sought peace, yet could engage in war with such determination and even honor. In their minds, combat was either unnecessary or an absolute last resort. They couldn't imagine it being woven into their cultural fabric, an entire identity born from the concept of defense and valor. Elena continued, her expression thoughtful. There's a word we have, warrior, that means someone who willingly takes on the risks of battle to protect others. Our warriors undergo intense training, not just physically, but mentally. They learn to face fear, to act decisively under pressure, and to protect those who can't protect themselves. They are respected and even revered, not for fighting, but for the strength it takes to endure and survive in the face of danger. One student with shimmering, insect-like wings and sensitive antennae hesitated before speaking up. But how can you willingly choose to face that kind of fear? To invite that level of risk upon yourself? Elena nodded, acknowledging the question's weight. Humans have a unique relationship with fear. For warriors, fear is something to be understood and controlled. They learn to confront it head-on, to turn fear into focus, to channel it into strength. This is how they protect their loved ones, their homes, and their communities. It's not an easy path, but for those who choose it, it's seen as an act of courage and selflessness. The students sat in silence, contemplating this new layer of human psychology. Fear, they understood, was an instinct to avoid harm, to preserve oneself. But to deliberately train to face and even master fear seemed an almost impossible feat to them. It was a foreign and unsettling concept, yet they felt an undeniable sense of respect. Humanity's relationship with fear, they realized, was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Where their species saw fear as a stop sign, humans viewed it as a challenge, something to push through and conquer. Elena went on to explain specific examples of human resilience in combat situations, telling stories of soldiers who had endured intense conditions, harsh climates, lack of resources, and overwhelming odds. She recounted the training soldiers underwent, the grueling physical exercises that tested the limits of endurance, and the psychological drills designed to foster unity and trust. She explained how human soldiers would learn to rely on one another, forming bonds that ran as deep as family. To them, loyalty and duty were as vital as the air they breathed, instilling in them a sense of purpose that transcended personal fears. One student, whose gelatinous form quivered with anxiety, asked softly, How do you cope with the aftermath? Doesn't facing so much fear, so much conflict, leave lasting scars? Elena's face softened, and for a moment, the class glimpsed a flicker of sorrow. Yes, she said, her voice gentle. It does. The scars aren't just physical, they're emotional too. We call it trauma, and it's something that many warriors struggle with after their experiences. We've developed ways to help through support systems, therapy, and communities that understand what they've been through. Healing is part of their journey, too, just as important as any training they've undergone. Facing fear can take a toll, and we try to help them find peace after everything they've endured. The class was quiet, digesting this new perspective. They realized that humans weren't just hardened fighters. They were deeply complex beings who carried the weight of their actions, who recognized the toll of battle and sought healing and understanding. They didn't merely survive. They learned, adapted, and tried to heal the wounds that were left behind. This, the students understood, was part of what made humans unique. The warrior instinct was not about seeking violence, but about a willingness to face it when needed and the resilience to confront and overcome its aftermath. Professor Thryak, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Elena, I believe I speak for the entire class when I say that this part of your culture has left us both humbled and deeply moved. You have shared with us a glimpse of what it means to be human, not merely to survive, but to endure, to carry pain, and to seek meaning in it. It is a path that few here would choose, yet I understand now why it is honored among your people. Elena offered a small smile, one that carried both pride and humility. Thank you, Professor. Being a warrior is for us a role of service. It's not about glory or power. It's about sacrifice, about the willingness to protect others even at great personal cost. It's a reminder that sometimes, in facing danger, we find our purpose. The room filled with a profound silence as the students absorbed her words. For the first time, they understood that humans were not simply Deathworlders. They were creatures of unimaginable depth, beings who could face the darkest aspects of life and emerge from it changed but unbroken. This warrior instinct, which had initially seemed so alien and frightening, now revealed itself as a facet of humanity's heart, a strength that went beyond the physical into realms of loyalty, resilience, and profound compassion. The students felt a new sense of respect, not only for Elena but for all of humanity. The Deathworlders, it seemed, had not only survived their world, they had transformed it, forging a spirit capable of confronting fear, enduring hardship, and healing from wounds that ran deeper than flesh. And as the lesson ended, each student felt a small part of that warrior spirit spark within themselves, a reminder that strength was not simply in surviving, but in facing the challenges of existence with courage and a sense of purpose. This expanded chapter explores humanity's warrior instinct, the emotional and psychological impact of conflict, and the deep-seated sense of duty and resilience that defines the human spirit, profoundly affecting the alien students' perception of human strength and complexity. The final day of Elena's visit to the Galactic Academy's Xenobiology department had arrived, and the students gathered with a reverence that hadn't been there before. Over the past few days, their perceptions of humanity had shifted dramatically. At first, they had viewed Elena as a curiosity, a being from a dangerous world with strange customs and survival tactics. But now, they understood that she was much more than that. Humans were more than Deathworlders. They were resilient, adaptable, complex beings with an unyielding will to survive and thrive, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the students settled in, they couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and quiet awe. Elena had shared with them stories of her planet, Earth, that ranged from surviving nature's wrath to humanity's ability to confront inner and outer fears alike. Today, Professor Thryak had hinted, would be a culmination of these lessons, a glimpse into humanity's soul, their philosophy, and their outlook on life. Elena began by taking a moment to look around the room, her gaze lingering on each face as if she could sense their inner thoughts. There was a gentleness to her expression, but also a hint of pride, as if she knew the impression she'd left on them. She smiled warmly and began her final talk. I know that these past few days have been intense, she said, her voice calm but filled with sincerity. I know that some of the things I've shared may have seemed strange or even disturbing, and that's okay. We humans understand that our way of life can be intense. But I want to leave you with something that I think truly defines us, not just as Deathworlders, but as beings with a deep appreciation for life. The students leaned in, captivated. They had come to understand that Elena was a teacher not just of human behavior, but of something far greater, a philosophy, a spirit, a way of facing the universe that was unique to her kind. Earth, as you know by now, is a dangerous place, Elena continued. We've had to learn to respect it, to coexist with its dangers, and to adapt to its challenges. But Earth has also taught us something precious. Every storm we weather, every predator we avoid, every fire we survive, all of it has taught us the value of life itself. When you live on a death world, you learn quickly that life is fragile, that every day is a gift, and that every breath counts. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The students felt the weight of her message as they thought back to her stories. They realized that humanity's strength didn't come solely from physical endurance or clever strategies. It came from a philosophy born of hardship, a deep respect for existence, and a gratitude that permeated every aspect of their lives. Elena's gaze softened as she continued. Our survival instinct, our warrior nature, even our fascination with fire, all of it comes down to one simple thing. We value life. We value it so much that we're willing to face the most terrifying dangers to protect it, to nurture it, to ensure that those we love are safe. That's why we train ourselves to confront fear, to endure hardships, and even to heal after trauma. Life, to us, is worth every risk, every scar, every trial. The class sat in stunned silence, absorbing her words. They could sense that for humans, survival wasn't simply about avoiding death. It was about embracing life to its fullest, with all its dangers, complexities, and wonders. It was a perspective they had never encountered, one that went beyond their own cultures and instincts. For many of them, survival meant only the preservation of the physical body. But for humans, it was something deeper, a mission, a philosophy, a choice to cherish life in all its forms. One student, a soft-spoken creature with delicate fins and a translucent body, raised a trembling hand. Elena, the student said softly, in my culture, we seek to live quietly, in harmony with our surroundings. To us, danger is something to avoid at all costs. But you humans, you seem to seek it, to confront it. Why do you choose to live that way? Elena nodded thoughtfully, understanding the question's depth. It's true that many of us are drawn to challenges, even when they involve risks. We call it a sense of adventure, a need to explore, to see what's beyond the next mountain or across the ocean. It's not that we seek danger for the sake of it, but we know that growth, discovery, and understanding often come from pushing our boundaries. In facing our fears and overcoming challenges, we learn more about ourselves, our world, and each other. Professor Thryak interjected, his voice resonant with newfound respect. So this, then, is what defines you, a willingness to grow through hardship, to face what others would flee from. You have shown us that to be a Deathworlder is not simply a matter of physical resilience, but of a spirit that is unbreakable. Elena nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. Yes, exactly. It's that spirit that drives us. Humans aren't just fighters or survivors. We're dreamers. We see beauty in the stars, mystery in the oceans, and meaning in the tiniest flower. And we believe that every risk, every hardship, is worth it if it means we can experience the fullness of life. The class sat in reverent silence, each student reflecting on their own understanding of existence. For some, life had always been a matter of survival, of adapting to the natural rhythms of their planets. For others, it was about finding balance and harmony, blending into their environments and avoiding danger. But now, for the first time, they were seeing life from a new perspective, one that valued every moment, every challenge, as part of a larger, more beautiful journey. One of the students, a large, armored being with a thick exoskeleton, spoke up with a hesitant voice. Elena, I used to think that Deathworlders were beings of pure aggression, creatures who survived only by dominating everything around them. But I see now that I was wrong. Your strength comes not from violence, but from love. Elena smiled, touched by the insight. Yes, love is a big part of it. Love for our families, our friends, our communities, and our world. It's what drives us to face danger, to protect those we care about, and to find meaning in every experience. Life is precious to us, and love makes it worth fighting for. The class was silent once more, each student awash in thought. They were beginning to understand that humanity's drive was not simply to survive, but to thrive, to connect, to cherish. Humans face danger not because they had to, but because they chose to, a choice driven by an appreciation of life so deep that it transcended fear. As the lesson drew to a close, Professor Thryak addressed the class, his voice filled with quiet awe. Elena, you have shared with us not only the survival tactics of a Deathworlder, but the soul of your people. We understand now that you are more than mere survivors. You are caretakers, explorers, and guardians of life's beauty and meaning. Thank you for this profound lesson. Elena bowed her head in gratitude, moved by the respect in his words. Thank you, Professor. And thank all of you for being willing to see us not just as Deathworlders, but as fellow beings who, like you, seek meaning and connection in this vast universe. As the students filed out of the classroom, they felt as though they had undergone a transformation. They had come face to face with a Deathworlder and learned that her strength was not in brute force, but in the courage to embrace life with an open heart, to face fear without yielding, and to hold on to love even in the darkest of moments. In the days that followed, the students found themselves inspired by Elena's teachings. Some even began to view their own worlds differently, recognizing small moments of beauty and realizing that fear was not something to avoid but to understand. Elena's presence had left an indelible mark on each of them, and they knew that her spirit, the spirit of a Deathworlder, would stay with them as a reminder that life, in all its forms, was something worth cherishing, defending, and celebrating. In the end, they understood that Deathworlders were not defined by their harsh worlds, but by the resilience, passion, and unbreakable spirit with which they faced them. And as they returned to their studies, they carried a piece of that resilience within themselves, forever changed by the warrior spirit and boundless heart of the humans from Earth.